Welcome to another episode of On the History Trail. I'm your host and tour guide, Mark Nonestied. New Jersey is a diverse state with a fascinating history, but unfortunately, in the minds of many people, their first thoughts about the Garden State are of a dysfunctional crime family, the Sopranos, that lived just an exit or two off of the infamous New Jersey Turnpike. On today's episode, we're going to talk with Marc Mappen, author of There's More to New Jersey Than the Sopranos. Published by Rutgers University Press, the book explores the many fascinating tales of the Garden State, from prehistoric elephants, a Martian invasion, and famous firsts like the phonograph and electric light. There's More to New Jersey Than the Sopranos is a wonderful journey through the history of our state, from the primitive past to the present day. Our guest, Marc Mappen, has been described by the New York Times as the eminent New Jersey historian. He is co-editor of the award-winning Encyclopedia of New Jersey and a former executive director of the New Jersey Historical Commission. So sit back and relax and follow me as we travel on the History Trail. Well, Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with the title of your book. Where does the title come from?
Well, I wanted to do a book of essays about New Jersey history. And I was trying to think of a good title that could bring all these essays together. And I was talking to a friend of mine who said that she had been on vacation in Eastern Europe, and she stopped at a restaurant in Gdansk, Poland. And she struck up a conversation with the guy at the next table. And he said, where are you from? And she said, New Jersey. He says, oh, Sopranos. And so I thought something like There's More to New Jersey Than the Sopranos would be a great title. And as a matter of fact, when the book came out, I started hearing from people. A woman sent me an email and said she had been in a taxi cab in Dublin, and the cab driver had said, well, where are you from, lass? And she said, New Jersey. He said, oh, do you know Tony Soprano? So it's a little disturbing that all over the world, when you mention New Jersey, people think of that dysfunctional mafia family. Right. But I still thought it would be a good title for the book.
Yeah, certainly grabbing. And so now that we have the title, the meat of the book, what was the impetus for writing the book?
Well, I was thinking that New Jersey gets dissed. And, people like you and me who live in New Jersey, we know that New Jersey is the butt of jokes. And I thought that New Jersey deserves more, that so this book talks about other aspects of New Jersey besides the Soprano, good things about our state, and maybe some that are not so good. So I believe that the way to get people interested in history is to tell a story. So these are basically stories.
Right. Well, you talked about, you mentioned the sort of the notorious reputation that our state has. In fact, CBS Sunday Morning recently, one of the commentators, Mo Rocca, had a segment about why does New Jersey get no respect? And he did a defense of New Jersey. Yeah. Why is it that we have to defend ourselves in the first place?
Well, here's my theory about this. New Jersey was one of the original 13 colonies. But unlike some of the other colonies, we were not founded as a religious utopia. Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, they are founded as according to God's will, the founders thought. And other early colonies had elites, like Massachusetts had this merchant elite, and Philadelphia had these businessmen. Virginia had settlers who liked to think of themselves as aristocrats, but not New Jersey. It was a very plain state right from the beginning. And as time went on, New Jersey began to assume the image of a place, kind of a blue-collar state, where nothing much was happening, a state of low culture. And related to this is the fact that New Jersey has two giant media capitals. One of them is New York, and the other is Philadelphia.
Okay.
And I think ever since ancient history, the elites of big cities have looked down their noses at the rural inhabitants around them. So I think that's part of it.
So with the stories in the book, what are some of your favorite stories?
Well, one that I love is about a young woman named Alice Hyler Ramsey. And in 1909, she achieved a famous first. She became the first woman to drive an automobile from coast to coast.
Wow.
She went from New York City to San Francisco, California, the first woman to do this, in fact, one of the first people to do it. And it's just a wonderful story of a very plucky woman who faces a lot of adversity, but accomplishes what she wants to do.
And this is 1909, you mentioned?
This is 1909.
So she's got a car with a crank on the front and kerosene headlamps and...
Yeah, I like to think her car was more of a lawnmower than an automobile. It was pretty crude.
Right.
And the car often broke down. It would fall into holes. It had to be towed out by horses. It would break an axle. But she did most of the repair work. She fixed the car. She kept driving right on.
Well, you have another chapter that is Man Eats Tomato and Lives. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. This is a ridiculous legend that actually a lot of people believe, that originally the colonists in America thought that tomatoes were poison.
Okay.
But that in Salem County, a man in Salem County in the era before the Civil War believed that people could eat them, so he walked up the steps of the courthouse and he ate a tomato and he did not die. And this was such an accomplishment that after that people began consuming tomatoes. But it's a great story. It's just not true.
Okay. And on the cover of the book, you have an image of Annie Oakley.
Yes.
And that she lived in New Jersey as well?
Annie Oakley lived for a great part of her adult life in Nutley, New Jersey. And it's just hard to think of that Wild West heroine, that sharpshooter, living in New Jersey. But she loved it here. And she and her husband, Frank Butler, stayed here in the winter, because in the summer they would tour with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show.
Okay. And what? Let's talk a bit about the information gathering for a book like this. I mean, I would imagine this must be many years in the making.
Yes.
How did you go about researching and gathering all these great stories?
Well, I love to do research. And one of the things I love about it is you come across things that you didn't expect to see, or things that you knew nothing about. New Jersey is blessed by a lot of libraries and archives that have information on New Jersey: newspapers, letters, diaries, photographs, like the State Archives, the New Jersey State Museum, Rutgers University libraries. There are many others. So it's a great state to do research because a lot of those early records have been preserved.
Okay, and they survive and are accessible.
That's right.
Yeah. And there's another chapter that you have on the Morro Castle mystery. I always loved hearing stories about the Morro Castles, New Jersey's great shipwreck. What were some of the mysterious circumstances behind the shipwreck?
It would make a great movie, and I wish somebody would do it, because as you know, this was a luxury cruise ship that would take passengers from New York to Havana, Cuba in the 1930s. And then while on a return trip one evening, a fire broke out on the ship, and it did not quite match the Titanic, but there were many deaths as a result, and the ship burned. It then washed on the beach at Asbury Park, and became a great tourist attraction for a while. So there's that, and just the spectacle of this cruise ship catching fire. There are other mysteries, like the captain. Just before the fire broke out, the captain of the ship was found dead in his cabin, and that's never been satisfactorily explained. And then there's long been a theory that this was sabotage, that a member of the crew, for maybe because he was insane or he had some other motive, he set the fire and he was to blame for this tragedy. So it's an enduring mystery. And I must say, there's a lot of these in New Jersey history, like the explosion of the Hindenburg, another thing, a huge disaster. That one occurred right in front of cameras that were running, and people were on the ground and saw it. And again, there are many theories about that. Was the Hindenburg sabotaged.
So with the Morro Castle, you mentioned, George Rogers, who's
Right.
the radio operator,
That's right.
who is reputed to have stayed at his station as it was burning around him, sending the SOS calls out. But later in life, he's linked to possibly being the one that set the fire.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a real hero at the time of the Morro Castle. Because he stuck by his telegraph key and kept sending out the distress signals, even when the cabinet he was in was filling with smoke. And he would appear in vaudeville shows, because he was such a well-known person. But later in life, strange things began to happen. He was convicted of trying to blow up his boss with a bomb. Not a kind of a thing a normal person would do. And then later on, he was actually convicted of murder, murdering a family that lived near him. He was basically insane, and it is theorized that he may have set the fire that burned the Morro Castle. But we don't really know. One of those mysteries.
Right. And ultimately, I think he's sent to prison. He ends up dying in prison.
He died in prison.
Yeah. We were talking earlier. I knew a gentleman who was the third assistant purser on board the Morro Castle, a man named Tom Torson, who just had these phenomenal stories about what life was like on board the vessel, both before and after the disaster, and was in the cabin with the doctor when the captain was found dead, and also sat across from George Rogers at the lunch table, and didn't quite have kind things to say about him at the time. But and so it also happens in September of 1934. This is right after Labor Day, and there's this incredible, when all the beaches close up, all of a sudden there's this influx of people going down to see it. When you have given lectures or spoken about these topics, do you have people come up to you afterwards with stories about some of these events?
Absolutely. So when I talk about the Lindbergh kidnapping, people come forward and say that when they were kids, their parents' car was stopped by the police searching for the Lindbergh baby. I talk about the War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938. And people tell me how they were little kids listening to the radio, and their parents believed this fake broadcast about a Martian invasion that started in New Jersey. So I really do love that when people come up and share their experiences with me.
Oh, great. Well, you talked about War of the Worlds. What were some of the stories? Well, why don't you give us the basic background to it?
Okay. Well, Orson Welles, he was a very young man in his 20s. He was a director, a writer, and he had a radio program called the Mercury Theater on the Air. So for the broadcast on Halloween Eve in 1938, he thought it'd be a great idea to do an adaptation of this old Victorian science fiction story called War of the Worlds. But Wells had the story updated to present-day America. So when people heard this on the radio, they heard about Martian spaceships landing in New Jersey, at Grover's Mill, New Jersey. And it was done in the form of contemporary radio with bulletins. There would be some dopey piano music, and then there would be a bulletin about how this invasion is spreading. And all over the country, some people actually believed it was true. So some people were injured falling downstairs. There were college students who called their parents begging them to come and take them away. And there was a story about a guy from Freehold. He was driving away in a panic, and he stopped to call his cousin. And he said, "Are the Martians there?" And his cousin said, "No. But the Tuttles are, and we're about to sit down to dinner." So there's a lot of stories like that.
Right. Interesting. You also have one of the near the end of the book, one of the final chapters is on corruption in New Jersey.
Yes.
I'm just curious, is there more to New Jersey than corruption? It certainly seems we have a very long history, a tradition of it.
Yes, we go back a long way. A lot of corruption in the history of New Jersey. The first royal governor of New Jersey, Lord Cornbury, took bribes and was accused of many other things. And there have been other cases of corruption. However, criminologists have tried to do surveys of political corruption measuring it like the number of convictions or arrests per population. And New Jersey is not, according to these measurements, the most corrupt state in the nation. There are others. You'll be glad to know that there are a few others ahead of us in that category.
Well, when you look at our state, we have this diverse geographic region, the shore, the pine barrens, urban, rural landscapes, a very diverse population as well. I mean, is it of no surprise that we have sort of these larger-than-life personalities, these great stories? I mean, do we have the ingredients, I mean, all the right ingredients within our state to produce these types of people and these stories?
Well, let me talk about diversity, because that's an important thing. And New Jersey has been diverse right from the beginning, right from the colonial era. And ever since then, the census always has shown that New Jersey exceeds the national average in terms of the number of foreign-born, the number of immigrants. And I think this has helped to make New Jersey a very tolerant state. And public opinion surveys have shown that New Jerseyans, a majority of New Jerseyans, tend to feel that immigration and population diversity is a good thing. Whereas, you know, if you've been reading the papers these days, some states are up in arms against immigration. So I think that has given us a wonderful tolerance. In fact, somebody who did some surveying, a Rutgers professor, said that New Jersey has a whatever attitude. You're different from me, whatever. You know, and I think that's very healthy. And maybe that's somehow linked to your question of do we have a lot of interesting people? Well, we do.
Right. Now, what do you think of some of the modern television shows that are out there that are portraying New Jersey? I mean, Boardwalk Empire. What's your thoughts about that? I mean, are there positive views of some of these shows?
Well, let me say there are a lot of these shows. The Sopranos, of course, one. Jersey Shore, Real New Jersey Housewives.
Right.
There's a lot of these.
I would say those must be lower on the list, though, right?
Well, people watch these around the world. You know, there are. I was told by somebody who went to Sweden that she saw The Sopranos on TV. It was in English with Swedish subtitles, and she said it's very popular there, and people are using it to learn English. Maybe not the best way to learn English. But as for Boardwalk Empire, it is a dramatization of Atlantic City during the Prohibition era. And it is based on a wonderful book by Nelson Johnson, a judge in Atlantic City who wrote this history of his town. It was bought by HBO. However, it doesn't purport to be an exact history. The level of violence that takes place on Boardwalk Empire is far beyond whatever happened in Atlantic City.
Okay.
Atlantic City was no, Bible resort. Believe me, they had gambling, they had all sorts of, bootlegging, but it was not that violent. But I have to confess that I really like that show because it shows New Jersey history. It shows boss Frank Hague of Jersey City. It shows Al Capone in New Jersey. It shows Al Capone going to a bar mitzvah. It shows Warren G. Harding. So if you're a history fan, you have to love this show. Violent though it may be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned some of the personalities. I mean, what are some of the other people from New Jersey? I mean, Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison.
Yes. Oh, right. Yes. Oh, New Jersey has have been the home to many famous people. It's really quite remarkable. Count Basie, Paul Robeson, Sarah Vaughan, in the music field. Oh, and Frank Sinatra. We have produced inventors. You mentioned Einstein. Among the inventions that have been produced here are bubble wrap. Bubble wrap was invented in New Jersey, and container ships, and of course, thanks to Thomas Edison, movies, phonograph, the electric light. The transistor was perfected at Bell Labs, and a New Jersey scientist won the Nobel Prize for finding the echo of the Big Bang that created the universe some 17 billion years ago. And I love the fact that the first person to identify the echo of the Big Bang did it right here in New Jersey.
Right.
So a lot of creative people, a lot of inventors, a lot of actors. have come from New Jersey. Jack Nicholson is one that pops to mind. So maybe this has something to do with that tolerance.
Right. What other projects are you working on?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Now I'm working on a book about gangsters. Maybe not really inspired by Boardwalk Empire, but it's about Prohibition gangsters. It's called A Generation of Bad Men, The Rise and Fall of the Prohibition Crime Lords. And it looks at Prohibition gangsters, bootleggers from around the nation, and how during Prohibition they prospered by providing illegal liquor, and then after Prohibition was repealed, they wound up in prison or shot or deported, things like that. So.
And what are some of the New Jersey stories that in 1929 there was a meeting in Atlantic City? Can you talk a bit about that?
I can talk a lot about that. Right. So these gangsters from around the nation, like Al Capone in Chicago and Lucky Luciano in New York, and many others, they came to regard themselves as a business, and like any business, they wanted a plan for the future. So they decided to have a convention. And they had it in Atlantic City. Why? Because Atlantic City was sort of a wide open town where their presence would be tolerated. So they gathered in Atlantic City. They had their conference at the President Hotel. They planned for the future. They strolled along the boardwalk. And apparently they had a wonderful time. It was just after that that things began to fall apart with, again, the Great Depression and Prohibition, and the fact that the federal government realized that they could prosecute these guys for income tax evasion, which put a lot of them in jail. So I thought I would branch out from New Jersey history a bit and talk about a larger topic in American history, but I couldn't do it without mentioning New Jersey.
Right. Well, I find it amazing that you can research the topic to begin with. I mean, I can't imagine there's many records out there that exist for a meeting like that. I mean, how do you go about researching a topic like that?
Well, it's serendipitous, like a treasure hunt. Maybe I was reading a biography of Al Capone or something, and it said that he went to this conference in Atlantic City, and I was astonished by that. So I started to do some research, looked up newspapers, and by gosh, they were there. And they were covered in the newspapers.
Wow.
And then I find if you're researching one thing, like maybe gangsters in Atlantic City, it will mention somebody else, like Abner Longies Willman, who was New Jersey's own Prohibition gangster from Newark. And then you can travel back if you start to read about the Civil War, New Jersey's role in the Civil War. New Jersey contributed a great deal. Two New Jersey soldiers were captured by the Confederates and displayed great heroism under difficult circumstances. I don't want to make my book sound like just kind of a freak show of disasters and criminals, because it's not. I really do try to talk about the good as well as the bad, and good things that have happened here in New Jersey, as well as some of the shadier stuff.
Right. Now, you were the executive director of the New Jersey Historical Commission and had direct contact with many historical societies and organizations around the state. How did, writing a book about these sites and about these stories, what's the importance of preserving the story, of preserving the sites themselves? I mean, where they exist. For instance, the Morrill Castle, there was a memorial for the first time in, 75 years that was actually erected at the Convention Center in Asbury Park.
That's right.
But what's the importance of preserving those stories in that format?
Well, I think you would agree with me on this, Mark, that it's important you preserve your history. I think that communities these days have really a lot in common. McDonald's franchises and things like that, and highways, but what makes our communities special is their history, things that happened in the past. And I think that history can serve a good purpose by making us feel proud of our communities and what the people who were here before us contributed. I think that old saying that people who do not remember the past are forced to relive it is actually true, that it's important to look at the problems and the opportunities we face these days, by looking at what happened in the past. You know, we're in a difficult economic patch, but it's in some ways reassuring to look back at New Jersey and the Depression to see how our state weathered that crisis.
Well, tell me a little bit about yourself. I mean, why the deep interest in New Jersey history?
Mark, you know, I think some people are born with history DNA or bitten by the history bug, and they're just fascinated by it, fascinated by the stories of history, and that was true of me. I think from my earliest childhood, I just enjoyed reading history, and I studied it in college and graduate school, and as I said before, it's a drama. It's a human interest story. I think if history is taught as memorizing dates and names, it's going to be boring. But if you tell it as a human interest story, as a novel, you get people interested in it. And I think history is a great novel. It has the greatest plot twists of any book, and interesting characters, and triumphs and tragedies. So, but I believe that it has to be presented in an entertaining way, or in a way that will enable people to realize that this is a story of human beings.
Mark, in your book you have what's the most funniest joke in the world. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes, here's the story of this joke. In England, a sociologist named Richard Wiseman did an experiment to find out what made people laugh all over the world. So he and his colleagues sent out something like 40,000 jokes on the internet. They asked people to vote for the jokes they thought they were funniest. So this is the joke that got the most votes and is officially the funniest joke in the world, okay? It begins by saying two New Jersey hunters are out in the woods. One of them grabs his chest and falls to the ground. So the other guy whips out his cell phone, calls up emergency services. You got to help me, my friend, I think he's dead. And the operator says, I can help you. First, I want you to go over and make sure that he's dead. And then she hears a gunshot, bang! And the guy gets on the phone and says, okay, now what? Well, this is a joke about New Jersey. And what makes it funny is that it begins by saying two New Jersey hunters are out in the woods. So it sets this up. It telegraphs the fact that something really stupid is going to happen in this joke. Right. And unfortunately, this is an example of the New Jersey jokes that people tell about our state.
Thank you very much for sitting down and talking with us about your book, There's More to New Jersey Than the Sopranos, and retelling some of these fascinating stories.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Mark. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as we spoke with Marc Mappen about his book, There's More to New Jersey Than the Sopranos, and learned about the fascinating history of our state. For more information, you can visit Mark's website at markmappen.com, or you can visit your local library, or you can even pick up a copy of Mark's book at any major bookstore or online at the Rutgers University Press website, rutgerspress.rutgers.edu. And for comments or suggestions about today's episode, you can visit the East Brunswick Public Library website at ebpl.org. Thank you for watching, and come along again as we travel on the History Trail.